Cool people doing cool shit. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it?
More yesterday, I was like, oh, I'm so nervous about this. And I was like, this is Seth, though. Like, I mean, and in my mind, I was like, well, the worst thing that can happen is like I could throw up, or, which maybe that's not the worst thing, or like the whole thing just sucks. And you're like, it
Yeah.
didn't really work out, see ya.
My experience with you is that was never going to be a risk.
Well,
But
I mean, you never know. I'm full of surprises,
I know. Well, before we get too far into the weeds, this is Sarah's son.
Where do I look?
Sarah's son. Well, you can look anywhere. You can ignore those, or you can look at
that'd
them.
be
It
good.
doesn't matter. And I know you. Well, just to start off, like a little background. I met you who knows how long ago when you were at Heartside Ministry.
Oh yeah.
Which, just for people who don't know who you are, one, what did you do there? And also, knowing you as I do, just the fact that it has ministry in the name seems like you wouldn't have ever stepped foot in there.
You are completely correct. Yes. Let's see. Would have been 1999, 2000, and I had just moved to Grand Rapids from Toledo, Ohio, to be closer to my favorite human, my Aunt Judy, who lived here for a long time, since the 70s. And I came up here to live near her, but I did AmeriCorps at the dwelling place in the Heartside neighborhood for a couple of years. And that I feel like, it's got its purpose, that organization, whatever. And they do some really great work, and some other stuff is a little bit rough, but oftentimes they were a little too busy to deal with the AmeriCorps workers. So we were just like, I lived in the Heartside neighborhood for a couple of years, and so we would just kind of like meet people and hang out and figure out like, okay, what's the need from people, not the organizations, but people, right? My neighbors, and I would meet people and they would be like, man, one of the first friends that I met, Anthony, he was just like, oh man, I'm a poet and a painter. And he said, yeah, this place down the street, he said, they're pretty cool. They started asking us more questions about what we needed. And I was like, yeah, right. And he said, yeah, and a lot of us were just like, well, I often have to give is cussing okay? Right, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's unavoidable.
Well, yeah. He'd say like, I have to give, my social number and, all this information. And he said, and some of us are looking for places to live, and some looking for food, and sometimes mental health stuff. Sometimes, it was like a lot of co-occurring, stuff going on. And he said, but this one place, he said, they have a lot of different programs. But he said one of them is, he said they just started this thing where he said we told people that we were just kind of lacking creative expression in the midst of a bunch of stuff going on, And that friend of mine he was living on the street at the time. And he was just like, I've always loved poetry, and it was kind of nice to be able to sit down in a place with other people and do that. And he said, I didn't have to take a class. I didn't have to pay for shit. Whatever. And he said, it's like basically a shoebox of art supplies and writing stuff, and they're just kind of passing it around to different agencies and whatever in the neighborhood. And Heartside Ministry ended up having like a spot in their basement for a while. And then it just kept morphing and morphing, and more neighbors were coming, and we're like, this provides so much sense of like heart and relief and discovery and, all kinds of stuff. And so people kept saying like, oh yeah, you should go work there. And I was like, it sounds amazing, and I'm glad you're having that experience, but there's no fucking way I'm gonna work in ministry. And they were like, I get it, but you should stop by. And I was like, okay, So I ended up going for, just like a neighborhood meeting. They would host a lot of stuff in their chapel. So, so this is where like my stereotyping bit me in the ass in some ways. So I went there for a community meeting, and I was just like, oh shit, like a lot of neighbor-led stuff and whatever. And there was bullshit there,
Sure.
Whatever. I ended up working there off and on between volunteering, AmeriCorps volunteering, and then employment for 17 years, And the studio just kept like morphing. So what I did was mostly, I only worked in their art program. And after some time, the little basement studio, just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And Vern Berry had a business next door to the ministry, and he died. And they ended up renting that space and kind of renovating so it was connected to the bigger ministry. And we turned it into a gallery so folks could sell their artwork and keep the majority of the money. They kicked back like 20% so that we could buy, supplies and whatever. But yeah, so, I mean, it was considered non-denominational, which it always seems like bullshit to me. But
Non-denominational seems like bullshit?
we,
Or what seems like?
especially when nonprofits like claim to be, especially like in Grand Rapids, it seems like a lot of them are religious and they'll say, oh, non-denominational. And I'm like, right? So, they did have church services and things like that, but I also appreciated that nobody was forced to do anything. You didn't have to talk about whatever. You signed in when you came in, but you could use any name. If you wanted me to call you, Jim today, I'll call you Jim today. And if you want me to, call you Stardust tomorrow, I'll call you Stardust tomorrow. Like that's just whatever. And I liked that it gave more autonomy to people and whatever. So it definitely, I was like, oh yeah, this is nice. And yeah, it's associated with this organization, but at the time it was run by people who I thought were pretty rad. And then those people, either died or were fired or whatever as the leadership changed. And yeah, after some time I burned out.
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to ask you is why you decided to leave. You just got burned out?
Yeah, and I think most of it was, I had my own personal stuff. I had gone through a divorce, and I then many years later met a different partner and had a baby, and there was, just a lot going on. But a lot of it was just administratively burned out. Just I felt like really misdirected and really pulling the organization from the hands of neighbors and the workers there who I felt like were more in tune with what neighbors wanted or whatever. And it just, I mean, at one point, one of the directors that they had hired came in and she pulled me in her office with a board member. Like it just, they sat down and they were like, we really don't know why you're working here. And we're now thinking we're going to have people sign a declaration of faith to work here. And I was like, oh, that's fine. And she's like, we even went through like many years ago, your resume and your letters of reference, which mostly were from neighbors. And, she was just like, that just doesn't seem valid. And I was like, oh, noted, and it just kept changing. And now Mel Trotter swallowed it up and I don't even know if it exists, but the art program is nothing.
It's gone?
Gone.
Yeah. I'm sure that you have no shortage of thoughts on this, but that stretch of town has a reputation. Some people are scared to be down there. Some people love being down there. I mean, the people that I can think of that are scared to be down there are not people I'd want to hang out with. But
right.
But it has a reputation for some bad stuff. And what was it like living in that neighborhood? And I always feel like, yes, there's some stuff that happens down here that you sort of wish wouldn't, but it feels like it gets what's the word? Unfairly characterized.
Yeah.
And of course things go wonky when you say you can hang out on this corner and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of limitations, and yeah, there's just a lot of structural stuff and systemic stuff that's fucked up all along the way. And then, yeah, exactly. I think oftentimes too, people are just like, well, I don't want anyone to ask me for money, and I don't want someone to shit in my doorway. Well, if you don't want someone to ask you for money, you don't give it to them, or you find other ways whatever. And then, yeah, if you meet the occasional person, which you will meet anywhere, I've had it happen in Meijer parking lots and, wherever, who is being more, aggressive or something about asking. I mean, that's one thing, but that is so that's just like such a small scope to this big thing that people love to focus on that little area. Like the whole fucking city commission, they were discussing whether or not, to fine people, whatever it was, $100 every time that they, got busted for being in the wrong place or, whatever, just recently, right? And just trying to, and I was talking to a city commissioner of like, can you understand, like, someone's not going to have this money. You're going to end up having people in jail, whatever, and then forming more of a record for folks and whatever. Anyways, so.
And then paying to incarcerate them when
Correct.
you could have, I mean, even in this real estate market, like there were solutions that weren't jail. But you can't like just let someone live in a house, apparently.
Oh, yeah, no, it's, wow, that's so complex for people to think of, yeah, Yeah, so, I think, I don't know, I didn't, it was neighbors. It was just living in a neighborhood. I think the biggest shift for me, I think, was just like I had moved from Ohio to there, and I wasn't around my friends that I knew or whatever. I just knew my aunt. And so, just like making friends and whatever, but, we just, I don't know, just connected with people, got to meet people where they are, and that was that. I mean, it sucked because there was not a grocery store there, and
Yeah.
like that type of stuff.
I was just thinking about that yesterday, I think, because I think you live not far from me. And
Now?
yeah. And if that's true, and I don't want to tell people where you live, but
Oh, I don't care. I live in Baxter.
oh, okay.
So, okay.
Yeah, so I'm right over at MLK Park. So
Oh, yeah. Oh,
walking
okay.
distance.
Oh, yeah.
But so we both live in what has historically been considered a dangerous neighborhood. That's not been my experience, but definitely, like the Wilsons live not far from you. And when I first met Aaron, he told me like that this is considered a bad neighborhood, but we love living here.
Oh, socioeconomics. And I mean, people are talking about race at that point,
Yeah.
just like it's whatever. I don't know. I don't think I've ever, except I think maybe when I lived in the country, I don't know, there was a time when I was younger where I got sent back to live with family in Ohio. My folks were incarcerated and I got sent back to live with folks. I was like maybe in third grade or something for a while. And I think just because there was just a lack of people in the middle of the fucking rural Ohio, I mean, in who I did encounter there was a fucked up shit, right? So,
Yeah.
but I don't think I've ever lived anywhere where I was just like, oh, like this is just like fucking.
I have. It
back
sucks
off.
way worse.
Okay.
It sucks way worse.
I don't know. It's just people and everything is just, I don't know, it's just like a different climate each time. I mean, I'm not dumb. I'm not dumb to like knowing that that's what people think of the place, or,
Right.
or reasons why it would have, felt that way. And I tried to be, I don't know. I need to continue to think about roles that I play. When I moved, I don't know, I've been in my same house for 20 years. And, it was a place, like the neighborhood, like just seemed, there's neighbors, out and about. And I was looking at things. I saw this house that I thought was just really beautiful and needed a lot of work and just connected with neighbors. And, I was thinking, I need to be mindful of what a mixed neighborhood looks like. Income-wise seemed similar to where I was at, but wanted to, I don't know, try to be conscious of if I was doing anything to fuck up the neighborhood, basically gentrifying and things like that. And there's a lot that I learned and a lot more than I need to learn. But I notice now that there are way more white families moving in. That we got crosswalks painted now, things like that. So.
Yeah, so I've been in my house now for 4 years, and I had some self-consciousness, like I hope I'm not, because 4 years ago, me and the kids were the only white family that I was aware of, at least. And I was like, man, if they get to know me, they'll know that this is not a gentrifying risk, except that I will be visible out on the street, and then Starbucks will be like, oh, there's a white dude.
And I mean, your intent and my intent might not be to like gentrify a place, but you know,
When the
we're-
ratio changes, it changes.
yeah, when it changes, it changes. And your friends say you're living there and they're like, oh, cool, I can afford that. Or just even perceived, like, you know, if you moved into a place that was a mostly black neighborhood, like, you know, what was your thought process behind that? Because you might not mean anything, but if like a whole neighborhood of folks is just like, oh, you know, they're feeling good about where they're at, and then they're like, oh, this motherfucker, you know, and that's stuff that we have to continue to think about. This is weird,
I think
kind of,
there's
to
a
talk
fair-
about
Yeah,
with like two white people
Right,
like
yeah.
hypothesizing about.
yeah. But I think it's fair to, without doing like stereotypical white guilt, recognizing that we might have been
Yeah.
one of the perpetrators, even though we both know not what we're doing, but just that we exist now in the
Yeah.
in the neighborhood makes you
Yeah.
possibly one of them.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah,
I think I am.
yeah,
And I think, I mean, and I don't say that with pride, you know, I'm like, I just got to keep learning
yeah.
and move on from there.
So when you left Heartside, my recollection is the next thing was tattooing. Is that how that worked?
Yeah.
And you didn't just like jump into tattooing.
No, I transitioned, I guess it was, I don't remember how many months. And I started to think about it, and there were different reasons for that too. I could tell that I was, like I said, organizationally and just doing, you know, work for a long period of time. I had my own shit that I was dealing with. I had some assault stuff and whatever, relationship wise and whatever that I was kind of dealing with. And then I think I was just like, okay, I need to like maybe focus more one-on-one time with folks. And I'd been getting tattooed and I knew more or less why I was getting them, and met other people who was similar, to where, you know, it could be anything from scar cover up to body reclamation. And sometimes it's just, I think this is cute and I want this over here or whatever. So, you know, I have an art background, and then just in practice, not like schooling, you know, social service, social field, social work field, not a social worker, but, you know. And one of the people that I met in Heartside, she was an artist at the studio, and she's still an artist. She's awesome, vibrant human. And she once said to me in the studio, she's like, oh, I wish I could get tattooed like you have. And I very ignorantly said, like, well, you can, you know. And she was like, And she told me the story about how she went into a shop in town that was nearby where she lived, and you know, she has a bit of a tremor, and well, who cares, right? Whatever. But like, she sometimes she was like, oh, they had a hard time understanding me when I was talking and whatever. But she brought in her money, that was her money, to get a tattoo, and they told her no, and they turned her away. And this.
Does she know why they turned her away?
She just said like that they were like, no, like I think, well, first they had mentioned that they thought that she needed someone there with her.
Oh.
To like, was it her money?
Oh.
And like, do you need someone here to support you during this? And she's like, nope, I'm my own payee, I have my own money, like I just want a tattoo. And she was just like,
And that was all because of the tremor?
I mean, you know, she often doesn't wear her teeth, like, and she's zooming around in like a motorized wheelchair, and she's like really eccentric in her own way. And I was just like, okay, what? And I think they just thought whatever of her. And so they, you know, turned her down and whatever. And I was like, whoa. And she talked to me about different things that she wanted. And I had already started thinking, I was like, oh, I wonder if I could tattoo. But there's a lot of tattooers out here that do really beautiful work, and that's awesome. But it wasn't really my interest. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I could work individually with people if they had like scarring that they might want masked or covered up for whatever reason. It could be domestic violence or self-harm or whatever. And this lady, she had been in, she got hit by a drunk driver once, and she's real open about her story that, what is it called? The Rapidian did like a couple of stories on her that she wanted to share, and that's some of the stuff that she shared. And so she was like, yeah, I have some big scarring on my leg. That might be nice to have some stuff worked around. And I was like, I'm gonna learn to tattoo. And now every year I tattoo her on her birthday.
Oh, cool.
And sometimes, more often than not, she brings me her own drawings and comes in and gets work done. And, she was married and to this guy. They were together for a really long time, married for a short period of time, and he passed away recently. And so she gets like little memorials of the two of them together, riding a shark or,
And when I've seen you post, I think, saying that you only work in black ink.
I prefer to. I just don't feel like I do well with color. It's like a building process on skin, and it's hard for me to understand, like, as you're building, like with the black line on any tone of skin, my brain is like, okay, I understand where that's going. And color, again, for me on any tone of skin, I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, you're just continuing to build, but it might not look like that after it heals down, and I just don't get it. I also don't like it, but whatever, So I have done, color on lots of folks, just like little bits, but just not.
And do you, because I feel like what I've seen of yours and what's on me of yours, it's still very much in the style of when you were doing like lino cuts and stuff like that. So is that, like, if someone brings in a picture or of anything, like, you'll do that too, or is it always in Sarah Sun style?
If I don't mind, like, if someone brings something in. So my oldest kid was like, hey, I want this, a tattoo, whatever, and a friend of hers had drawn it. And I just made sure that she checked with the friend and either paid for that image or they worked, something out or whatever, and get permission from her. And then I just tattooed that. I don't mind that at all. I think that that's kind of fun. Sometimes you have to change the image a little. If like the lines are all smashed together in the drawing, it might not translate well into a tattoo. But I like doing that type of stuff. But yeah, it's also fun when people are okay with or even like the kind of, like, the style that I have, because it's just how my brain works. And then I kind of create these punchy images, like, bolder line work or whatever.
That was I have two favorite parts about getting a tattoo from you. One is the conversation that happens while you're in the chair. That's actually my favorite part of doing it. But then the other part is, I think I have two of yours.
I think so.
And both times I was like, well, here's what I've been thinking about this month. So now just do your thing. Here's concepts, and whatever you come up with, I will put on my body. And I have not gotten burned yet.
Oh, that's good.
No, that's great.
Good.
And I just wondered if I don't know how often that happens, but from what I've seen, at least stylistically, it seems like for you that you do get to work in your style more than is typical.
I feel grateful for that. I had when I was apprenticing with this woman, she said, I've spent, I can't remember how many years she had been tattooing. It was 12 years or something at that point, I'm not sure. And she's like, I know what your style looks like. I know I'd been getting tattooed by her for a number of years, and she's like, I know you're a printmaker. I know what your style looks like. She's like, I want you to try a bunch of different things, including shading and color and things like that, just so that you understand the application and the process, and just to see if maybe it's something that you do end up liking with tattooing. But she was like, I think it's fair for you to just work in your style and see how that goes, because she said, I've been tattooing for so long that she said, I've grown really tired of doing tattoos that I don't want to do. And she knew the things that she liked, and that might change over the years, but she knew the things that she liked to do. And so why not, like, go to an artist or let an artist do like what they excel at? And then nowadays there's just even more and more. I feel like everybody and their sister is like a tattoo artist, and I'm like, that's cool, that way it gives people more opportunities for styles and whatever. And I figured, yeah, okay, like I'll try it and see if people want my style. So I can either do that and hopefully meet people where they are with the kind of work that I do, or I could learn a different style. But I would rather just pick a different career, I think, and that's okay. If it wouldn't have taken off, I think, I don't know, has it taken off? But if it wouldn't have worked, I think I would have just been like, well, I tried and, whatever. I just feel too old to like continue trying to like fit into something that's not for me. And there's other tattoo artists who.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, at least what I've seen on social media lately makes it seem like maybe you've also taken a little bit of a, not a turn, but you've narrowed your path to.
Yeah.
Are you exclusively working with trauma stuff? Or?
No, I prioritize. That is my priority. My thing is like.
Say in a not Seth way, which means say it in a cohesive sentence, what we're talking about.
Oh yeah. Well, I think my intent, when I got into tattooing was to work with folks again. Like it started off with thinking about actual scarring because I had people that asked me about that. And then I was thinking about myself and other people that I knew or had encountered who, someone had said that they were marked by trafficking and they wanted like a cover up or something like that. And I was like, I think that's a space that I could work in, and that felt good and made sense. And after a year or so, a friend of mine, I had lunch with her and she said, is it doing what you wanted and what you hoped when you left? Basically like working in Heartside and all that stuff. Is it doing what you wanted with tattooing? And I was like, she said, give me percentages. And I was like, less than 20% of the time. And she's like, what if you just said, I want to work with trauma survivors? And I was like, well, I want to be clear that I'm not like a therapist, I'm not a social worker and whatever. And she was like, okay, but you have years of experience and you do continuous trainings. I'm like, yeah, but. And I was like, fuck it, yeah, okay. And so I just wrote, I prioritize working with trauma survivors. And then over time, I've added grief work, to that as well. And the thing is, I don't know if I do this right or the best way or what, but I put myself out there for that and then I see what happens. And then oftentimes word of mouth from person to person, I think makes a bigger difference. And I'd rather have people come that way or see me in that way than anything that I like, post about myself or make myself blah, blah, And I've ended up meeting a lot of people. Well, the thing is I don't ever ask, like it's not my business. I put myself out there and I feel like if people find me, they find me for a reason. And it might be that they just liked the match that I drew or something like that. Or maybe they were just looking for a tattooer and I just happened to have an open space and whatever. So I don't ever ask anyone, like, you don't have to say at all, like, oh, I'm a trauma survivor, whatever. I just tell people, like, this is what I'm here to do. And then I guess I'm also of the mindset, like, feel like everybody's a trauma survivor in a lot of ways. And I can't, it's too tough to do, what people say, like, capital T, little t, like, trauma is, everyone's is different and, but it feels like the space for me to be in. And in thinking of my whole like collective history of even just like childhood and growing up and any kind of that stuff and different jobs that I've had and different people that I'd met and specifically friends that I met when I was living in Heartside and working in Heartside. There was a lot of trauma, there was a lot of grief, there was a lot of death. And it just really got me thinking about like how to, I don't know maybe like hold space or whatever corny term for folks in that moment. And, I had gotten tattoos at places where, that when I left, I had the thing and I had this thing that I could remember and I could look at and that felt good to me. The experience, I would say 3/4 of the time, if not more, I was like, whoa, like I had some like older dude once when I was 17. He was just like, what are you doing later? I'm like, not you, I'm a child, like, it's just, shit like that. And there are artists who like don't have trauma training, but that they, I don't know, my coworkers, I feel like they're just really good. You inevitably, anything, I'm sure people who are estheticians and stylists and whatever, you sit with people for a period of time, and some people say nothing and they want a silent appointment. Some people, but I feel like a lot of the times you're sitting with people and they're really talking about a lot of their personal stuff. It's their moment. And
Is that hard to leave at work?
it used to be, and I don't feel like it is as much anymore, but that has taken a lot of practice and a lot of people that sort of are like tapping me and being like, you need to fix this in yourself because you're like holding on to too much for people.
Hannah Sullivan, do you know Hannah Sullivan? Friends with Amy.
Dancer?
She's a dancer,
Yeah.
She's also a therapist, and I asked her about that, and she calls it calling forth your inner asshole, not because you're being mean, but you have to say, fuck that. This doesn't get in, because otherwise you will take it home. That was her take on it.
Oh yeah, I can see, how that would be helpful for people. That's not something I think, I'm not built like that. I had a friend who said to me, she comes from a line of like, of people who do sort of like body work, right? And I was tattooing her one time at the first shop that I worked at, and we finished, and she was like, "Hey, babe, you were you felt really heavy this time," and I was like, "Fuck, I'm so sorry." Like I was burying down too hard on you, and she was like, "Oh no." She's like, "You're actually pretty lightheaded," but she's like, "No, you felt it. I think you need to learn how to let go of stuff." So she essentially, as someone who like does a lot of body work with people, she was essentially telling me that her practice is what you said about Hannah, right?
Yeah.
And I said to her, "Yeah, I get that. That makes sense, but that doesn't feel like me." And she was like, "Yeah, I don't think that feels like you either." So she just, told me, she's like, "I think you're a person who in some ways like experiences it like coming in, but she's like, you have to figure out a way to let it go out." So she suggested to me, she's like, "You know how you have to wash your hands a shit ton at work?" I'm like, "Yeah." And so she said, but before you get started, you're washing your hands, and she calls it like, intention setting. So she's like, set your intentions for that person in that space. You can just do this in your mind, whatever, to kind of like get yourself focused. And then do what you can while you're there. And then to give people hopefully like a compassionate and understanding experience, sometimes better than others, and I'm always learning. But then she said at the end, and this sounds really simple, but when she said that, she's like, "This is gonna be really simple," but she's like, when you go to wash your hands at the end, which you have to do, like in between and whatever, but at the very end, she said, you wash, you visually see the water and the soap, and you just say it has to wash down the drain, and I have to like let that go. Because in that moment, you're hoping that you can give someone a piece of what they need or want to support them in that moment. And yeah, and then, every once in a while, and I don't do this, very often, but I'll go to see her, and she does what she calls sort of like a clearing in a way. I don't really know, but I felt like it was a kind of thing where she knows what she's doing. She comes from a line of people and who do, and I just had to trust that someone was telling me that I wasn't doing enough for myself, and I'm very like, I got it, I'm good. I know I'm good. And she was like, "Yeah, but you're not, so can you fucking sit your ass down?" And I'm like, it feels whatever. And she's like, "Yeah, okay." And then the first time I sat down, I was like, okay. She's like, "Yeah, did you know about asking for help? You've heard of this? Let other people do this sometimes." It's like, oh, yeah. So.
I've never done a session like that, but what I've heard from every single person who's ever done that is the same thing, where they went in kind of skeptical and then left with a soaked shirt because it's all full of tears. And
yeah, just the imagery that comes up as well. I mean, I've been in therapy for a long time, and I started a number of years ago doing EMDR therapy for some shit that was really hard for me to like, detangle. But the visual imagery that I get in those like talk therapy sessions, and then the EMDR part, it's wild, the similarities between the way that I pause to like create these visual images and see and almost like reposition things. Like I can see them, what happened, what I can remember and what I want to remember. And then it's like, well, like I was learning about neuroplasticity. I've never been academically smart. I don't really give a fuck. But I started reading more about neuroplasticity, and it literally gave me hope to live, because I think from just like trauma in the past and whatever, I thought, okay, my brain is just a way. And how am I going to continue with life if my brain is just this way? Like, it's just the way that I do things. And then I was reading about neuroplasticity, and I was like, holy fuck, like our brains are sort of like, I think they call them something like plastic or something, not actual, but it's like, it's that over time, like you can reshape those, you can kind of formulate those grooves that have been there really deeply, like a record, and you can kind of like move it and kind of reshape things, but it takes a lot. And I was like, oh, there's hope, like an actual, often I'm like, I don't need proof of this, and I don't get, but I was like, oh, there's some science there that helps me to understand that. And I think it allowed me to just sort of like, okay, and settle into things like the sessions that I would do with that person, or like EMDR therapy, or some other things in life, and gave me.
I realized that because I've gone to therapy for a lot of years too, and I can kill it in therapy, and I can talk as objectively as possible about what's going on, and really like from a spherical perspective, wrap my head around the shit that I'm in here talking about. And then you leave and it feels good for a couple of days, and then you're like, but I still feel like a fucking piece of shit. And then you feel like a bigger piece of shit because you feel like a piece of shit. And I was like, well, yeah, but I intellectualized the whole thing. Like, why is it still bothering me? And then like not that long ago, I sort of got clued into, yeah, but you forgot about like your fucking nervous system.
Yeah.
And that one's a little bit harder to trick.
Oh, it is. I mean, they talk about, I don't know the terms, like the somatic terms or whatever they talk about, like, like mind and body. And I'm like, damn, that's the hardest thing for me to connect. Like they're obviously right here together, but I have a hard time like getting out of this and understanding, right? So, that there are different like autoimmune things that I have going on. And anytime you watch things, I don't know, I love like Gabor Mate, and I'm like looking at his interviews or something, and then he's just like, yeah, why are you if you're doing all this kind of work, why the fuck are you surprised that your whole nervous system is shit? I'm like, oh, he's like, because look what's connected to all these things. And I'm like, no, yeah. And I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to.
Yeah.
But
you're gonna have to.
I mean, I have kids. I feel like I at least owe it to them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're probably old enough now that, because your kids fall kind of in the range of my kids. Like, there's some days where I'm like, oh man, the dynamic has shifted. Like like, are they now like worried about me? And they're not worried that everybody's going to be okay, but I'm uncomfortable with where there doesn't need to be a hierarchy, but it now feels like I don't know, for some reason it makes it feel like there's a hierarchy that isn't there to me.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's like a fucked up thing about parenting, right? Is that you're just like, oh, when people always say like, I'm not here to be your friend, I'm here to be your parent or whatever. And I'm like, man, gross. But the other side of things is when I remember, especially with my youngest, who is 10 now, I'm like, yeah, some kind of structure would probably be good, for this kid, because I've definitely like let it go off the rails, sometimes, but whatever. But yeah, I don't want there to be some hierarchy, but also like the kids, not but also. But kids, I mean, they literally can't feed themselves when they're little, and they need some guidance, and some of that comes from us, and some of us comes from, like the world around us and keeping them safe. And then, when it gets to the point where they're like almost 19, you're like, okay, I guess just tell me who I need to fuck up.
Yeah.
Like, if something happens, like, I wear big rings for a reason. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Well, I sort of am on the flip side of that coin where I feel like I definitely wanted you guys to not buy into the hierarchy. I definitely wanted you to realize that all of us are making it up as we go. I did not want to drive that home in such a direct way that I am making this up and often fail. But here we are.
Yeah.
And so that's where it has probably nothing to do with hierarchy and more just like, oh, here's another way where I can spend the day feeling like shit about myself and how I have let everyone down.
Well, yeah, but then that's more work for you or me or whomever to do, which is like, okay, then we're centering ourselves in that. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then being able to pull back from that and say, okay, like,
Yeah.
I'm now suddenly making parenting about me again. And how do I like pull this back? And well, a lot of what we learn and what we see, but.
Yeah, for sure. Before we forget, because this again could easily be a 6-hour conversation that we'll never run
you
out
can
of
cut
time.
like all of that. Yeah. We can just go straight into want to talk about death?
Yes, finally, Jesus. Yeah, tell me about that. I saw you said you mentioned something about that, and I didn't even know what you were talking about, and I think maybe I Googled it or something, and I don't know if you said you were a death doula, but that's where I ended up.
I have like a badge or whatever it's
Oh,
called.
okay.
But,
so what are you even talking about?
Well, I don't know.
And why did you end up there?
Well, so a death doula, it's very vast, right? It's very broad. And how I want for people to understand that, like, I'm very much in the sort of like figuring out process. So it's not like you're talking to some, expert in the field or whatever. I have like a few years of studies and things like that in terms specifically of like death doula, but a lifetime of like, grief and loss and whatever else. So death doulas can do anything from like, one person described it as like, if you think about hospice and they're there to do also like often end of life, they expect like probably the last 6 months of someone's life that they're gonna come in, but they're gonna do medical stuff, right? So they're gonna administer, medications and that type of stuff. But the death doula isn't the medical side. They are more of a like, support side to either the individual or the family or both, and helping almost sort of like end of life planning and care. Some death doulas, it is very vast. So there's not, I didn't understand at first, like when you say death doula, it's not just a thing. It can be very broad in its scope about what the person does. And sometimes I think, like in my mind, I think maybe I should say more like death worker or grief worker or something like that. But a lot of people are sitting bedside, and sometimes they're just providing comfort. There are people who play music, like will come and bring their cello and play if that's what a person wants, and it would like provide some relief. And then hopefully they've maybe taken some classes to, know what to do if they're like, oh, this person has a death rattle, what do I do right now? And like, don't be weirded out or whatever. There are people who read to the person books that they want to read, especially about more just like end of life stuff. They might have philosophical conversations. They might want to talk about advanced care planning and wills and all of that stuff. So we all, like some of us do all of that. But a lot of us just like try to make sure that we know our resources to say like, okay, so I don't have my forte, I don't think so much is just like helping someone do advanced care planning and wills and stuff like that. But if I can find resources or, like just tap into the things that already exist to help people, sort of transition more smoothly or connect with their families or, whatever. So, and that's like such a small nutshell of like a lot of the different things that death doulas do. I mean, some of them even help with like home funerals and, different processes like that. But it's pretty vast, but all in all, it's meant to be a support to the person or their close loved ones as the person is dying. I think.
So comparing it to like a childbirth doula, how much of that is you like at bedside or even on the property? Because it sounds like a lot of what you just described you could be doing from your house with internet access, and then just report back to them with what you found, and here's a link. And
Yep, can do that too. And this is the thing, I thought when I was started to take the classes and get interested for various reasons, I thought that it would be me sitting bedside with people, which a lot of death doulas do. And as it happens, I've only done that with one, and it was one person who was dying, and then they ended up not dying. And I realized at that moment, I'm like, I don't have the capacity for this at this moment. And I think partially because, I don't know, my energy with like having my kids, you know, my youngest is 10, my oldest is 18, you know, but also I sit with people at work a lot of times, and I'm hearing a lot of stuff. And that's on me. I put myself out there for that. But I thought, okay, maybe this is not the capacity in which I do this. The other thing is that as I was taking these courses, I found, and I feel kind of frustrated that I didn't think of this first, but it was still good for me to take all these courses and continue to, that death doulas are not covered by insurance like Medicaid or Medicare. And it is a thing that I can't, I grapple with it, and I can't like make amends with it. I have no interest in sitting with wealthy people as they die. They need care for sure, but they can afford that and they can figure that out. And I think that I've just seen, either from my own upbringing of, you know, not having very much money, but still like might have like, I don't know, when my grandfather died, like he had a funeral, there was a casket, you know, it was the middle of the country in Ohio, and he was buried, and so he had means to do that. The funerals were, to me, you know, very kind of sterile, and you're just, you know, staring at this made-up body in a casket. But that's what people want, and if that's their wish, okay. But I was sort of like, this doesn't seem like it's for everybody. And then just the more friends that I met, and was specifically thinking about my friend Anthony that I met when I first moved to the Heartside neighborhood. After a while, I don't remember what year this would have been, but he was murdered. And, you know, Heartside had a little memorial service for him, which was, I mean, it was pretty lovely. But I thought afterwards, what happened to him? Where'd he go? And I started just like kind of asking around, and, you know, it just kind of went down this path of reading more and asking a lot more questions, just like between hospitals and stuff. I sat with someone who I thought, again, hospice was being called in and whatever, and it was wild, but this person really like turned it around. But this person didn't have even money for like cremation or anything. So I was like doing research, okay, there's state emergency relief funding, you know, for like cremation, but it's not a lot. And I just was looking at the big differences between, you know, those who have financial means and those who don't. And just watching lots of folks that I had known, specifically in Heartside, but other folks, you know, that just really had not, you know, the finances basically, or who it's written, and I hate this word, but are unclaimed when they die, and what happens to them. And so I thought that feels really important to me, what happens. And so I just was kind of trying to figure that out and read some stuff. There's even some articles online and on MLive, you know, whatever. And, you know, this process of due diligence of trying to find, you know, they're like, well, there's a lot of people that we find who died and they were living on the street or in tent city, or sometimes just a family member didn't have the means and the person was just left because they were like, I don't know how to do this. And a lot of society tells us, right, that we need like a fancy casket and all of this other stuff that, like, again, for some folks, if that is either culturally or whatever is important to you, then absolutely. But a lot of I feel like the funeral industry can be just like a total, I don't know, like scam or racket or whatever. I even have a friend who's a funeral director, and she's like, oh yeah, it's ridiculous. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Or like that was more of my interest, is like trying to understand how people were being supported as they were dying, or if they more had a sudden death and there was like a lack of finances, what happens? I thought, maybe over time I'll be able to just do that work on a volunteer basis for folks who have a heads up that they're dying, whatever. And that very well will still be coming. But right now, my capacity, I've been more focused on what happens when, again, the term unclaimed bodies. So right now, my understanding for the city of Grand Rapids is that they, the due diligence, so to speak, is done. And then bodies are taken to, I want to say it's 2 different cemeteries in Grand Rapids, but I know Oak Hill by, Hall and Eastern, like the huge cemetery on both sides, there is a section that's dedicated for folks who are unclaimed. And the person that I talked to at the city in the cemetery department said, oh yeah, I just talked to the cemetery groundskeeper there. She said he got hired in 2015. And she said, I just asked him yesterday, how many unclaimed bodies do you think that you've buried since 2015? And he said about 400. And I got to thinking, I'm like, well, what, I guess so right now I'm working with a couple of, a friend of mine who is, she's like a classically trained violinist. And I was like, maybe we could have like a really small symphony there as sort of like a ceremony for folks, but it could look different every time. I've been doing a lot of research, for a little while here on like different cities and towns that do things for folks, and sometimes they're very religious. My friend that's a funeral director in Detroit, where she works, the director is like Catholic, and he was like, oh, we'll have mass for folks at the Catholic church, and she's like, that's what he does. And she's like, it's really beautiful. And I was like, yeah, I get that, but I think it'd be really nice to meet people where they're at, and to also, I can't claim what someone would want after they died.
Right.
But I'm just thinking that it would be, especially like doing this research about all these other cities that are doing things. I'm like, okay, how can we give people, like something with dignity, and what would that look like? I'm like, maybe music, and it can be public, and people can bring flowers if they want to, or they can just like pay their respects or something, so that people are not just left. So I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at right now, but I don't know where that will lead.
Do you know Fred?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
Hi.
We're about to wrap up. You said that Oak Hill is one of.
Now I wish my mind is blanking, but I'm pretty sure there's at least one other cemetery in town. And that information I found just on like an MLive article, whatever. So I don't know. I know that's like very specific, but that's kind of where my brain is right now. Especially having met so many people who there was nothing sort of built in. Or again, there are things that families can do. Apply for state emergency relief funding. It's not very much. And whatever. But I think like all in all, like to pull back like bigger picture, I guess, realizing, talking about like death and dying, and everyone has their own different relationship with this. But I guess in my mind, it still seems to me, at least in this current culture, or maybe United States or whatever specifically, is like, it's a lot of stuff that people don't want to talk about. And some of it is like, we don't want to face our own, like, oh God, our mortality, whatever. And I do get that. But somehow in my brain, I don't feel that way about myself. I don't know why. I'm scared of a lot of things, and I am always worried and anxious and whatever. But I do not know why that I don't have a fear of death. And I don't know like where that came from. I don't think about like, ooh, pain and all and agony and whatever. Yeah, that would fucking suck. But it's more just like, no, and like, okay, how can we have more conversations, sort of normalize talking about death and dying and understanding like within that there are so many different ways, the classes that I was taking the first day, they were like, all right, y'all, you're here for this class, but before we get into anything, we need to talk about implicit bias. And they're just like, I see a lot of white people here, and you got to understand you are not going to be for everybody. And I was like, damn, yep. And they were just like, sit your ass down and know where you are wanted and where you belong, and when you need to shut the fuck up, when you need to listen, and when you know that that job is not for you. And don't push your, ideals on people when they're dying, because people are very impressionable. So that's tough, right? Because people have questions. Well, what do you think happens when you die? And we're trying to say, that is such a good question. The ideas are so vast. Well, what do you think happens? I'm like, what a politician answer, but, it like gets this stuff, talking. And then, I learned about Mortals Cafe, of course, years ago when they were still open. And I was like, this is great. Like, this is more conversation around death and dying. And some of the angle is, yes, oh, fuck, yeah, I probably should get a will or advanced care planning. Or I guess I just assumed when I died, like, what do I have? A house? That's it? And my shit that's in the house? I'm like, okay, well, my kids can just split that up. I'm like, well, I don't want to fuck them over either. So
right. Yeah.
And then some of it literally is just like, can we normalize talking about this so that we don't just show up at funerals that are literally just for the families, and do something that the person probably doesn't want. And it's like very sterile and whatever. And how can we kind of like tie those parts of, they call it, right, in the industry or whatever, like they call it like trying to have a good death. And as we're doing that, it's kind of helping me understand more about living a good life. And I'm not sure that I've done that in my life, like wanted to work harder at living something that feels really good to me.
Like, what do you mean? What does avoiding that look like?
I think people call it like shadow work or some shit like that. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to be like, can I be helpful? And can I like make connections with people?
I just learned about shadow work like not that long ago.
Fuck that. I mean, yes, but also, God damn.
I was like, no, it's a shadow for a reason. I'm supposed to hide that.
It's back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turns out I was wrong, but.
Oh, right, yeah. So there's, plenty of things that I avoid, and, as I'm talking, I'm like, damn, my shit's fucked up.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. So, I don't know. It really though has like opened me up when I was like, man, as I think more about death and dying and learn more about people's experiences, and some things that especially get like swept under the rug or are not affordable or just things that people want to avoid, I'm like, okay, and I dig more into that, and then it does help me. I mean, sometimes literally in the day, I'm like, oh, what a joyous thing that I just saw, this fucking tree that just split in half, like, from a storm or whatever, and it's kind of helped me to slow down and remember those moments, and then have these really like nice, in-depth, and sometimes really small conversations with folks around like what they would like to see happen when they die, instead of it just being like, well, nobody talks about it, and so we just guess,
Before I forget, if you want people to find you, how do they find you in any of your realms, either as a trauma-informed tattoo artist or as a death worker? How do they find you?
Well, I don't know if this is the greatest either, some stuff that I'm figuring out, but Instagram right now, there's, so my tattoo page is sun.medicine, and I work at a shop called Balm Tattooing. So Balm has a website that can just like connect people, balmtattooing.com, I think, and that has a website that can just like connect to my Instagram page. So people can like, could DM me from there or whatever. And then I have it's called Love Letters Death Care. That's also on Instagram, that people could kind of, ask questions. And again, I'm still kind of feeling out what my role is. And I do imagine that will change a lot over time. But, right now I'm focused on just sort of more like education for myself and others, and hopefully these sort of like maybe symphony cemetery type of things, and whatever that turns into, and then we'll see from there.
Cool. I don't want this conversation to be over, but the camera's gonna die.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming over
Thanks for asking.
and talking about it.